In December 1980, a new investment firm opened for business in a strip mall in Miami Lakes, Florida. It had a president, a receptionist, cash counting machines, and corporate stationery. Within 18 months, it would process $19 million in narcotics revenue, converting duffel bags of 10s and 20s into clean wire transfers bound for Panama. The firm's name was Dean International Investments. Its biggest client was the Medellín Cartel, and its owner was the United States government. This was Operation Swordfish, the DEA's attempt to dismantle a Colombian trafficking network by becoming its banker. The agency laundered cartel money, charged a commission, and recorded everything. 67 people were indicted. 122 were arrested. But the operation didn't end because the DEA decided it was finished. It ended because the agency could no longer control what it had built. The agents feuded with each other. The paperwork fell months behind. Millions in drug cash sat unsecured in office closets. And the man holding the entire thing together, a Cuban exile with a tax fraud conviction, was so afraid of the people paying him that he secretly recorded them for a year and a half. Not the cartel, his own handlers. By 1980, federal law enforcement in South Florida had a problem that couldn't be solved with handcuffs. The cocaine trade had matured beyond anything the existing playbook could address. Street-level busts barely registered. Agents could seize 100 kilos on a Tuesday, and the supply chain wouldn't hiccup by Wednesday. The organizations moving product through Miami operated like corporations, with logistics departments, financial officers, and regional managers who never touched the merchandise. The man at the top of one such network was Carlos Jader Alvarez, a Colombian trafficker whose organization ran cocaine from Medellín labs to American streets at industrial scale. Alvarez was insulated by layers of intermediaries. He didn't fly to Miami. He didn't meet with couriers. He managed his American operations through a single proxy, a woman named Marlene Navarro, known within the organization as the Hummingbird. Navarro was not what American law enforcement expected a cartel operative to look like. She was Paris-educated. She spoke 5 languages. She carried business cards that later turned up in the possession of drug lords on 3 continents. Her job was straightforward: collect the cash generated by Alvarez's distribution network across the United States and move it out of the country. By her own accounting, she handled roughly $80 million a year. The DEA couldn't reach Alvarez directly, but if they could become Navarro's banker, they could map the entire financial architecture of the operation, every account, every wire, every handoff, and build a continuing criminal enterprise case that would reach all the way to Colombia. To do that, they needed to open a bank. Dean International Investments was built from the ground up to project one thing: discretion backed by competence. The office sat in a professional park in Miami Lakes. Suburban, quiet, deliberately boring. The kind of place where a wealth management firm would lease space. Inside, it was equipped with currency counting machines capable of processing the volume of small bills that a street-level cocaine operation generates. There were meeting rooms designed to feel expensive. There were secure phone lines. And there was a suite of financial services tailored specifically to the needs of someone trying to move dirty money across international borders. The firm offered cash-to-check conversion, wire transfers to offshore banks, shell corporation formation, and peso exchange. The full menu of professional laundering. For every dollar it cleaned, Dean International took a 5.5% commission. This wasn't just cover. It was the price of credibility. A free service would have raised suspicion. A fee made it a business. The man who ran this business, day to day, face to face, handshake to handshake, was not a DEA agent. He was Robert Darius. Darius was 46, Cuban-born, a veteran of the Bay of Pigs invasion who had spent 20 months in Castro's prison camps before eventually making it to the United States. His post-exile life had been less heroic. He'd been convicted of tax fraud. He owed the IRS $200,000. When the DEA recruited him, he was broke, desperate, and possessed of the one quality the agency couldn't train into its own people: the quiet, courtly ability to sit across from a cartel financier and be believed. Darius became the institutional face of Dean International. He met the couriers. He counted the cash. He built the relationships that gave the operation access to the upper tiers of the Alvarez network. The DEA agents, primarily Frank Cellino, who posed as the firm's president under the name Frank Dean, and Carol Cooper, the case supervisor, managed the back end. They handled the surveillance equipment, the wire transfers, the coordination with prosecutors. In theory, the agents ran Darius. In practice, Darius ran the operation. He was the one Navarro trusted. He was the one the couriers called. And as the months passed and the money volume increased, that inversion of control would become the fault line that split the operation apart. The first major transaction came in August 1981. Navarro arranged to meet Darius in a lawyer's parking lot. She arrived with a locked suitcase. Inside, $484,700 in small bills, a single day's collection from the Miami cocaine market. Darius accepted the suitcase, processed the cash through Dean International, deducted the commission, and wired the balance to a numbered account in Panama. The cycle had begun. Over the following months, the deliveries accelerated. Shopping bags, cardboard boxes, couriers arriving at the office with cash bundled in rubber bands. Each time, the money entered the strip mall as street cash and left as a clean electronic transfer, passing through the American banking system without triggering a single federal report. This was possible because Dean International didn't operate in isolation. The DEA had identified cooperative nodes within Miami's legitimate banking sector. In July 1981, agents met with Manuel Sanchez, an assistant vice president at the Bank of Miami, who referred them to other institutions willing to accept large cash deposits for a fee. The banks didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. In early 1980s Miami, cash was cash, and the institution that processed it most efficiently won the most business. To reach deeper into the Alvarez network, the operation had to reach further geographically. In August 1982, Darius and Navarro flew together to Denver to collect a payment from a regional distributor named Saeed Jatter. The expected amount was $1.5 million. Jatter could only produce $679,000. Navarro's reaction was revealing. She wasn't angry about the criminality of the situation. She was angry about the shortfall. It was a breach of protocol. The numbers didn't balance. In the cartel's accounting, a missed target was a professional failure, and professional failures had consequences. That reaction told the DEA more about the Alvarez organization than any wiretap could. This wasn't a loose confederation of criminals. It was a managed enterprise with receivables, quotas, and performance metrics. By mid-1982, Dean International had processed approximately $19 million in cartel revenue. The surveillance archive contained over 300 hours of recorded conversations and videotaped transactions. The DEA had documented the financial mechanics of the Alvarez network in detail: who moved the money, where it went, how the commissions were structured, which banks facilitated the transfers. But the operation was deteriorating from the inside. The first fracture was personal. Frank Cellino, the agent posing as Dean International's president, had begun to inhabit the role with an intensity that concerned his colleagues. He treated his actual commanding officer as a subordinate. He complained that the administrative burden of processing cartel cash, the paperwork, the receipts, the chain of custody documentation, was excessive. The irony was structural. The agent running a fake bank was frustrated by the same bureaucratic requirements that every real bank is expected to follow. The second fracture was between Cellino and another agent on the team, a man named Clifford. Clifford resented Cellino's authority and his professional manner. The animosity between them escalated until the team effectively split into factions. For a stretch of 4 months, Darius was left to maintain Dean International nearly alone, meeting with cartel couriers, processing transactions, sustaining the fiction of a fully staffed investment firm with minimal oversight from the agents who were supposed to be supervising him. During this period, the record-keeping collapsed. The financial ledgers fell months behind. Critical surveillance recordings were lost or misfiled. And on more than one occasion, agents stored significant quantities of drug cash in office closets rather than logging it through the evidence chain. The DEA was laundering money for one of the most dangerous criminal organizations on earth, and it couldn't keep its own books straight. This was the environment in which Robert Darius made his decision. He began secretly recording his DEA handlers, not the cartel meetings. Those were already on tape. He recorded the agents, their arguments, their drinking, their complaints about promotions, their administrative negligence. He stored the tapes alongside 12 boxes of paperwork in what amounted to a private intelligence archive. His reasoning was simple. He had risked his life to infiltrate a cartel on behalf of an agency that couldn't keep its own files in order. The agents who were supposed to protect him couldn't stop fighting each other long enough to manage the operation. He viewed the tapes as insurance, proof that if the government abandoned him, it wouldn't be because he had failed. It would be because they had. 375 hours of tape, not of drug deals, of a government agency losing control of its own sting. Meanwhile, the operation faced an existential threat from outside. The IRS and U.S. Customs were running a parallel investigation called Operation Greenback, a legitimate task force targeting the same Miami laundering networks. The two operations had not been coordinated. They were targeting some of the same financial nodes. And Greenback was moving toward indictments that would have forced Darius to testify in open court, instantly destroying his cover and ending Swordfish before it could reach the highest levels of the Alvarez organization. The lack of coordination, what intelligence professionals call a failure of deconfliction, was not a bug of the system. It was the system. The DEA, the IRS, and Customs were all chasing the same targets with the same tools, and none of them were required to tell the others what they were doing. The final blow came from within the DEA itself. A corrupt agent, not a member of the Swordfish team, sold operational details to criminal targets. An anonymous telegram arrived at the Dean International office, warning that the firm's true purpose was known. The cover was blown. The resulting chaos produced a rushed conclusion. On September 7, 1982, days before indictments would be unsealed, Darius met Navarro one final time. He handed her $134,000 in cash, the remaining balance of the cleaned money Dean International was holding on her account. The United States government returned laundered drug proceeds to a cartel operative to preserve the credibility of a sting that was already over. The indictments came down shortly after. Agents seized 100 kilograms of cocaine, 250,000 methaqualone pills, and multiple tons of marijuana. The firm was liquidated. The strip mall office went dark. The case against Navarro, built on 300 recorded phone conversations and videotaped transactions at a strip mall in Miami Lakes, represented one of the first successful federal prosecutions of a high-level female operative within a major Colombian trafficking organization. Navarro fled to Venezuela, was extradited under legally contested circumstances, and convicted. Carlos Jader Alvarez was indicted under the continuing criminal enterprise statute, but remained a fugitive for years, insulated by the same layers of distance and intermediaries that had kept him out of reach from the beginning. But the numbers told a more complicated story. Dean International processed $19 million. The Alvarez network, by Navarro's own estimate, moved $80 million a year. The DEA had captured roughly 1/4 of a single year's throughput from a single network, in a city where dozens of similar operations were running simultaneously. The Great American Bank of Dade County alone would later be indicted for laundering more than $97 million, a figure suggesting that Dean International was a small player in a banking ecosystem that had been fundamentally captured by narcotics capital. The operation had also revealed something the DEA hadn't anticipated when it opened the doors of Dean International. For 18 months, The agency had functioned as a node in the cartel's financial infrastructure, providing the Alvarez organization with a stable, reliable laundering channel. That stability allowed the network to focus its resources on distribution and expansion, rather than on the risky, time-consuming work of finding trustworthy bankers. The DEA had inadvertently reduced the cost of doing business for the very organization it was trying to destroy. The deeper context made that irony even more stark. The Federal Reserve's Jacksonville office, which processed currency for the entire state of Florida, reported that in 1980 the state's banking system held a cash surplus of $5.8 billion. In a normal economy, regional Fed offices report deficits. Money flows out as businesses pay suppliers, as consumers spend, as capital circulates. A surplus of that size meant that billions of dollars were entering the state with no corresponding economic activity to explain them. The entire financial infrastructure of South Florida had been warped by narcotics capital, and the DEA's $19 million sting hadn't even registered as a rounding error. The skyline going up along Brickell Avenue, the one that tourists would photograph for decades to come, was being financed in part by money that arrived in shopping bags. The dysfunction that Swordfish exemplified, the feuding, the lost evidence, the unsecured cash, was symptomatic of broader problems within the DEA that had been building for years. When Attorney General William French Smith announced a major reorganization in January 1982, placing the DEA under the FBI's administrative oversight and giving the Bureau concurrent jurisdiction over drug investigations, it was a direct acknowledgement that the agency lacked the bureaucratic discipline to manage complex financial operations on its own. The full revelations from Swordfish, once they became public, only reinforced that judgment. The operation's evidence management failures helped shape stricter asset forfeiture protocols and more transparent auditing of seized funds. And the lessons learned about the risks of state-sanctioned laundering informed the 1986 Money Laundering Control Act, which for the first time made money laundering a standalone federal crime. Before that law, laundering was prosecuted as a component of other charges: drug trafficking, tax evasion, fraud. Swordfish was one of the cases that demonstrated why that approach was insufficient. Robert Darius testified as the government's key witness. He had been promised a $100,000 bonus and a resolution of his IRS debt. As the trials dragged on and the agents who had managed him scattered to new assignments and internal investigations, those promises dissolved. Darius was left with a tax debt, a blown cover, and 375 hours of tape, proving that the agency he had served could barely manage itself. The tapes eventually reached journalist David McClintock, who spent years reconstructing the operation. The resulting investigation exposed the systemic dysfunction of the Swordfish team in forensic detail: the feuding, the lost evidence, the unsecured cash, the broken promises. The informant's insurance policy became the operation's autopsy report. Dean International processed $19 million over 18 months. That was the official total, what the agents managed to document. Given that the operation's own record-keeping had fallen months behind, and that cash sat in closets rather than evidence chains, the true throughput may have been higher. The paperwork that was supposed to distinguish a government operation from a criminal enterprise had become, in the words of one assessment, hopeless. The strip mall in Miami Lakes still stands. The office that housed Dean International has long since been leased to other tenants. Nothing marks what happened there. No plaque, no historical designation, no indication that for a year and a half, the United States government operated a professional money laundering service on the premises, took a commission on every dollar it cleaned, and nearly lost control of the entire enterprise because the agents running it couldn't stop arguing long enough to file their receipts. The Brickell Avenue skyline that rose during this era still dominates Miami's waterfront. The towers are full of law firms and hedge funds now. The money that built some of them arrived in suitcases. And somewhere in a federal evidence archive, 12 boxes of paperwork and 375 hours of tape sit in storage. the private intelligence collection of a desperate informant who trusted the cartel more than he trusted the agency that hired him. Not because the cartel was honest, because at least with the cartel, he knew exactly what he was dealing with. The next time you hear about a federal sting operation, agents going undercover, building a front company, spending years inside a criminal network, remember that the operation's greatest vulnerability is almost never the criminals figuring out the ruse. It's the institution behind the ruse losing its grip on its own people. And the only comprehensive record of what actually happened inside this one was kept not by the government, but by the man the government considered expendable. What's the line between infiltrating a criminal system and participating in one? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this is your first time here, subscribe. We follow the money behind the institutions that shape the modern world.